Martell Holt sat in front of his therapist, reflecting on his life in a way that we rarely see from him on Love and Marriage, Huntsville. The conversation was not about drama, not about business, and not about relationships with others, but about himself. For once, Martell was trying to understand the deeper issues that he's been carrying for years. The talk began with the idea of inner substance versus the exterior, and for Martell, that meant looking past how things appear on the outside and facing what's really going on within him. He started by saying that he has always believed he's mentally strong. He sees himself as someone who can stop certain behaviors or situations in a minute if he chooses to. But even as he said it, there was an awareness in his voice, the realization that being mentally strong doesn't mean being emotionally healed. Martell admitted that there are still things he struggles to let go of. There are certain habits, attachments, and relationships that he knows are not good for him, yet he finds himself holding on. He spoke about how God has shown him who people really are, revealing their true intentions, but he often ignores those signs. He called them red flags, and he knows he's guilty of sweeping them under the rug. Instead of cutting off what's toxic, he tends to keep those people and situations in his life, creating a repetitive cycle that only ends up hurting him more. Martell's therapist listened closely, recognizing that this was not just about the people around him. It was about how Martell processes relationships and emotional attachments in general. Martell said that continuing these cycles damages him, but it also damages the people involved. He admitted that, deep down, he knows when something or someone doesn't belong in his life, yet he finds it hard to close that door. That's a pattern many people can relate to, the difficulty of letting go of something that once gave comfort, even when it's clearly unhealthy. The therapist challenged him on this, pointing out that Martell has a habit of avoiding emotional development by focusing on distractions, specifically, his relationships and even his children. That comment seemed to hit Martell in a vulnerable place. The therapist said that Martell uses his children as a way to keep from facing his personal growth. By pouring himself into external things, he avoids the inner work that needs to be done. And that truth, though hard to hear, might be exactly what Martell needed to confront. The conversation took a reflective turn when Martell admitted that, mentally, he needs to become much stronger to let things go that he knows are not good for him. He recognized that part of his problem lies in holding on too long, even when he knows it's time to move on. It's a weakness he's not proud of, and he sees how it's affected not only his life but also his peace of mind. When the therapist asked him what else he needed to work on, Martell hesitated. He said that letting go was the main issue for him, that it's been the hardest lesson. He even smiled slightly and said that he already knows his weak spots, he just hasn't mastered them yet. He acknowledged that when someone or something no longer benefits him, he struggles to cut ties, even when it's obvious that it's time to do so. He described how he tends to keep things that no longer serve him, and in doing so, he blocks his own growth. The therapist responded with something powerful, a reminder that without a vision, people perish. That statement lingered in the room, because it was about more than just faith. It was about direction. The therapist was trying to tell Martell that without clarity about where he's going and who he wants to be, he'll continue to repeat cycles that lead nowhere. Without vision, even strength becomes meaningless. Martell nodded. He said he's heard that quote before, but this time, it seemed to resonate differently. He started talking about prayer, how he needs to pray more, and not just in a shallow or routine way, but in a deeper, more meaningful sense. He recognized that his connection to God has been distant lately, and that he needs to rebuild that spiritual discipline. The therapist encouraged him to do so, saying that it's easier to stay consistent when you set the atmosphere, when you create a space in your life for mindfulness and peace. That moment showed a side of Martell that fans don't often get to see. This wasn't the confident businessman or the reality TV figure who's always in control. This was a man acknowledging that he doesn't have all the answers, someone who knows that healing takes work, and that the hardest battles are often fought in silence. As the conversation went on, it became clear that Martell is wrestling with patterns that go far beyond what's been shown on television. His struggle to let go isn't just about relationships, it's about his identity. For years, he's built his life around control. Whether it was controlling outcomes, narratives, or people, he's relied on that sense of dominance to feel secure. But now, sitting across from a therapist, he's realizing that control doesn't equal peace. Sometimes, the tighter you hold on, the more damage you cause, both to yourself and others. What's interesting is that Martell recognizes the cycle. He sees how ignoring red flags, maintaining unhealthy attachments, and holding on to things that should be released have all kept him stuck. He's aware that these patterns come with consequences. But awareness alone isn't enough, and that's what the therapist was getting at. Martell has to take active steps toward real change. Throughout this session, you could hear the tension in his voice when he talked about certain situations. There was frustration mixed with guilt, and underneath it all, a longing for peace. He talked about being mentally strong, yet emotionally, it's clear that he's still carrying a lot of pain. He's been through public humiliation, personal heartbreak, and the kind of judgment that can break a person down. And yet, he's still trying to convince himself that he can fix it all by sheer willpower. But sometimes, strength isn't about how much you can hold, it's about knowing when to release. The therapist continued to guide him, emphasizing that healing requires vision and mindfulness. It requires presence. It's not enough to say you'll do better, you have to create an environment that supports your growth. You have to practice self-awareness daily, not just when life gets heavy. Martell seemed to take that in. He nodded, acknowledging that prayer needs to be a bigger part of his life. He said he wants to deepen his relationship with God, to be more intentional about connecting spiritually. That statement might seem simple, but for Martell, it was a breakthrough. For someone who's been trying to control everything on his own, turning back to prayer means surrender, and surrender is not something that comes easy for him. In many ways, this moment could mark a turning point. For once, Martell wasn't trying to defend himself or shift blame. He was just being honest about his flaws, his struggles, and his need for change. The therapist told him that mindfulness and prayer can help him reset, that if he can create moments of stillness, he'll be better able to see things clearly. And maybe that's what Martell has been missing all along, stillness. His life has been filled with noise, public drama, broken relationships, co-parenting struggles, and social media battles. But when you strip all of that away, what's left is a man who's still learning who he really is. Martell's willingness to talk about these issues shows growth. It shows that he's aware of his shortcomings and is at least trying to work through them. But it also reveals how deeply rooted some of his patterns are. The difficulty of letting go isn't just about stubbornness, it's often connected to fear. Fear of being alone, fear of failure, or fear of losing control. And for Martell, those fears have shaped many of his choices. He admitted that when God reveals who people are, when the red flags become clear, he still finds ways to justify their place in his life. That behavior often leads to disappointment and pain, but he struggles to break the habit. It's almost like he's addicted to fixing broken situations. He wants to believe he can change people or rewrite outcomes. But that's not how healing works. Sometimes, peace comes from walking away, not holding on. In this therapy session, Martell wasn't being attacked or judged, he was being held accountable. The therapist pushed him to dig deeper, to look beyond surface-level explanations and really question his motives. Why does he stay in unhealthy dynamics? Why does he ignore warning signs? Why does he find comfort in chaos? Those are the kinds of questions that force self-examination. Martell's response, that he needs to pray more, might sound simple, but it carries weight. It means he recognizes that some battles can't be fought with logic alone. It's a spiritual surrender, an acknowledgement that he needs divine guidance to break free from his cycles. And for someone like Martell, who has faced public criticism and private turmoil, turning inward could be the start of real transformation. When he talked about setting the atmosphere for prayer, it was about creating space for God to move. It means surrounding yourself with peace, removing distractions, and allowing your spirit to reset. That's something Martell hasn't had much of in recent years. Between filming, co-parenting, and public pressure, his life has been chaotic. So to hear him admit that he wants to rebuild his prayer life, that he wants to go deeper spiritually, is significant. The conversation also revealed how much he's been struggling with emotional detachment. Martell said that sometimes he doesn't know how to cut things off, even when they're clearly harmful. That's not uncommon for people who have lived through emotional highs and lows. Sometimes, chaos starts to feel normal. But part of healing is learning to value peace more than familiarity. It's about realizing that not everything that feels comfortable is good for you. Martell seemed to understand that. He acknowledged that holding on to people who don't belong in his life has kept him in a cycle. He's aware that his inability to let go stems from trying to hold on to control. But now, he's beginning to see that freedom might come from release, from allowing God to remove what's not meant for him. As the therapy session went on, you could tell that Martell was trying to be open. He wasn't defensive or combative. He listened. He processed. And in his own way, he admitted that he's tired of repeating the same emotional mistakes, tired of the cycles that keep him from growing. When the therapist reminded him that he needs vision, it was a call to action. It was a reminder that Martell has to look ahead and stop living in the same old patterns. That message can resonate with anyone who's ever struggled to move forward. Sometimes, life keeps presenting the same lessons until we finally learn them. And for Martell, this might be that lesson: learning how to let go, how to trust God, and how to find peace beyond the surface. Throughout his time on Love and Marriage, Huntsville, Martell has been portrayed as confident, even arrogant at times. But this therapy session stripped away that image. It showed a man trying to understand why he keeps ending up in the same situations. It showed someone searching for a way out of emotional bondage. In many ways, this moment represents what healing actually looks like: messy, uncomfortable, and deeply personal. It's not about perfection. It's about awareness and accountability. It's about realizing that strength isn't about how much you can take but how willing you are to change. Martell's decision to say he needs to pray more wasn't just a line, it was an acknowledgement of spiritual hunger. It was a recognition that his healing can't happen without guidance. He knows he's been trying to fix things his own way, and it hasn't worked. Now, he's admitting that it's time to do things differently. If Martell truly follows through on what he said in that session, this could be a major turning point in his story. He has the opportunity to break patterns that have held him back for years. But it will require honesty, humility, and consistency, 3 things that don't come easy when you've lived most of your life in defense mode. The therapy session may have been short, but it carried a message that reaches far beyond the show. It was about accountability, emotional maturity, and faith. It was about recognizing the difference between being strong and being healed. Martell has always prided himself on being mentally tough, but toughness without growth only leads to stagnation. What he needs now is wisdom, and that begins with prayer, reflection, and the willingness to let go. As he continues his journey, only time will tell if Martell truly embraces this new path. But one thing is clear: for the first time in a long time, he's starting to look inward, and that's where real change begins.